Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. Total domestic box office was just a little under 68 million for the weekend, which was only about a 5% drop. So the American box office is holding, right? Again, we're in this weird in-between pattern of award season now. We're fully in it now in November, and things at this point are just kind of holding steady, I think, waiting for what hopefully is going to be a big Thanksgiving weekend box office. But I'm curious if that's going to work. I think with everything going on in the United States, which we'll talk about, people might want that escapism, or will they just find that escapism at home? But we're not there yet. Looking at this weekend opening, at number 2, we have The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. This is an adaptation of, I guess, like an old Christmas children's book from like decades ago. This is being made by, I think, the people who made like The Chosen, which is like that Jesus Christ show. So, I've heard that's quite good and not super, super preachy. And the trailers for this looked a little bit better than like the premise of like a Christian Christmas movie. And it actually did decently well, right? So it fell into my projections of around 8 to 11 million. It made 11.1. And this was a pretty wide release, over 3,000 theaters. It was made for about 10 million. So it's always good in that first weekend, if you can't get into that green zone, right? So if you're looking at that percent return column, ideally you want to double the budget, to account for all the marketing and advertising costs that aren't accounted for in typical budgetary figures. But if you can't get down the opening weekend, you want to at least be in the yellow, right? You want to at least pass that initial threshold of the budget. Whereas something like the movie Here, which you could see down near the bottom, that is in its second weekend and still in the red, right? So this is obviously has a lot more room to grow. I haven't really seen many reviews for this yet, so it's going to be interesting to see if it continues to maybe do well. Right now it looks like it's only been released domestically, and I can't imagine it's going to have this huge international worldwide release. But I'm curious, with so many other offerings that we're going to have throughout the award season moving into the Christmas season, I'm curious how this is going to play out. So stay tuned for that. Also opening this week was Heretic at number 3. This is like a religious thriller with Hugh Grant, and these like 2 Mormon girls come to his house, asking him if he knows about Jesus Christ, and he invites them in and turns into this weird, almost like Saw kind of like moral dilemma game thing. Interestingly, I had predicted that these 2 movies would be flipped. That Heretic was going to make around 10 to 13, and this was going to make, I think it was like, what did I say, 8 to 11. So they both fell within the projections. Technically, Best Christmas Pageant actually exceeded my projections by just a hair. But Heretic brought in a little over 11. It was fairly close between the 2 of them, and these numbers are always kind of like preliminary. Like usually we don't get the official numbers until like tonight, like right now as I'm recording, if not tomorrow morning. So for all we know, maybe this will flip. But as of right now, that's where it's at. It did have a small release. It looks like internationally, because it's worldwide, is around 13.5 million, whereas its domestic is just at that 11. But it was also made for about 10 million. So again, it's in the yellow, not bad to start. Could it kind of have some pull and legs as we go along? I don't know. I've heard it's good, so maybe some word of mouth might help it. Also, not opening this weekend, but going wide, we have the indie film Honora. This is, of course, from director Sean Baker, who is famous for films like Tangerine, about a trans sex worker, famously shot on iPhones. Right, this is like back in 2015, so it was like that was like the big like you can make a movie with anything kind of moment. This has gotten insane reviews. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes earlier this year. This is technically its 4th weekend, but it added about 800-ish theaters. So now it's officially wide. So it was at 11th last weekend. It's now jumped into the top 10 at number 7, bringing about 2.5 million. Again, it based off the fact they added almost 900 theaters, it makes sense they would also have a 36% jump. And the percent return, because again, movies like this are not about making a shit ton of money. They are about, supporting art first, and if they can make the money back later, that's great, because then they have more money to support more art, right? Films like this are huge awards contenders. They get a lot of critical acclaim, and that acclaim helps with the box office. A lot of times you'll have films have a much more limited release during the award season. And then once like the Golden Globe nominations are announced, or the Oscars especially, then a film will go wide, right? Because it's like now that it has the buzz, then they'll release it in Des Moines, Iowa, because now people are paying attention to it, right? All of that said, this has actually turned out to be semi-profitable, right? So it was only made for about $6 million. And so far worldwide, it's made about $12.5 million. So it's doubled the budget already. So I saw it. I released my review for this last week. I thought it was a phenomenal film. I highly recommend if you can see it, if it's playing. If one of these 1,100 theaters is in your city or town or nearby, I definitely recommend you go check it out. And it'll be interesting to see, can it keep making money? Is this just kind of like a one weekend blowout? But as we move into busier times, because of course, not too long from now, we're going to have Gladiator 2, we're going to have Wicked, we're going to have Moana. But this is easily one of the best films of the year. So I hope it continues to make money. Speaking of movies that I really love and are continuing to make money, is The Wild Robot here. So it dropped from 2nd to 4th place now, but it's in its 7th weekend. Made just a little more than $6.5 million. Only a 10% drop. Right? This is something I've been talking about week after week. So if you've been following this, I'm a broken record. But for any of you who are stumbling upon this now for the first time, The Wild Robot, before it even released, they kind of signaled that this is not going to be something that we're expecting to have this giant open. We expect this to be a film that kind of has slow but steady results week after week after week. And, having been out for almost 2 months now, I think that strategy has proven successful, right? So it is made around $131 million domestically, $292 million worldwide, off of just a $78 million budget. So while not this huge, Shrek level or Despicable Me level success, that's a decent percent return. And what's most notable is that domestic multiple, right? So this is a calculation we make, basically dividing the total domestic box office by the domestic opening, right? So ideally, you're not making most of your money in the opening weekend. So this multiple kind of indicates what kind of legs does this movie have? What kind of staying power does it have? So as you can see here, this has really good staying power, right? It is most of its money, it has this huge domestic multiple. So again, could not happen to a better film. I really, really enjoyed it. And again, like I had said when it came out, I think it was going to have, and I think I've been proven right here, which is rare doing these box office things. I'm usually wrong. But the fact that it doesn't really have a lot of competition from when it came out to Moana, the new Moana movie coming out around Thanksgiving. It has this big wide open space. So that's how, $6.5 million is not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. But again, every little bit counts, keeps people engaged, keeps it in the conversation. Interestingly, looking at number 1 here, it's still a little too early to tell what kind of legs this movie has, but this has done a lot better than I think anyone was expecting. So holding its number 1 spot in its 3rd weekend is Venom: The Last Dance. This is the 3rd Venom film released, because I think the last one came out in 2021, and the first one came out 2017 or 18, I think. It brought in about $16 million for the weekend. Did have the best per theater average of the weekend. And this is a movie that I think everyone kind of wrote off. It fell below the projections, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah. So originally it was projected to open around 59 to 72 and only made about 51 in that opening weekend. But weekend after weekend, I don't want to say it's held out, because again, it's still a little too early to tell, but it's made almost $400 million worldwide. right? Off of a $120 million budget. Now, it is a far cry from the other two films, but actually, you know what? It is a far cry, but let's see how much of a far cry it is. So let me look up the two other Venom movies here. So the original Venom made about 856 million worldwide in total after its full run. So we're nowhere near that. And then, oh, not The Last Dance. That's this one. Let There Be Carnage was the second one, and that total made about 500 million. So this is not that far off from the second film. But that film also had a handicap on being, that was still kind of in like that weird COVID in between, right? Where it was kind of, it was in theaters, but it wasn't super, it was wide, but it wasn't super wide, and people weren't necessarily going to the theater. So, I think this is done a lot better than it has any right to be, but, it's still a far cry from the last film, and especially the first one, which made almost $1 billion. But holding first place for 3 weekends for a film like this is actually is quite interesting, but that might speak more to just the current landscape of film offerings, them being more indie awards films or family films or horror films or what have you. So again, once we start moving into real territory here, again with Gladiator 2, Wicked, Moana 2, I think this is going to fall precipitously after that. Also still in the top 5, dropping from 3rd to 5th in its 4th weekend, Smile 2, right? Got much better reviews than the original film. Only brought in about 5 million for the weekend, but this is another one that, shows how valuable cheap horror films are for the economic ecosystem of the film industry, because and this is still like a fairly expensive horror film, all things considered, made for about $28 million, but it's made almost 125 million worldwide, so it's a pretty good percent return, and that's always been the allure of horror films. You think back to something like Paranormal Activity or like the Blumhouse, Jason Blum strategy, where you make a shit ton of really cheap horror films, and all you need is one to pop off, and it kind of pays for the whole party, and then some, right? And nowhere is that more evident here than Terrifier 3, dropping from 7th to 10th place in its 5th frame. The fact it's still in the top 10, I think, is a testament to this film. A film that, a sequel, a third in a franchise, a franchise that is not particularly well acclaimed by any stretch of the imagination, but this got semi-decent reviews. A pretty big drop this last weekend, which again makes sense because I had predicted that this was going to fall sharply once we officially moved out of October. I know last weekend technically was a full November weekend, November 1st to 3rd, but we were still kind of riding off of Halloween. So, it makes sense that we're kind of dropping here now, a little under 1.5 million. But again, this is where what I was just talking about is in full effect. Look at the percent return. Almost 4,000% return. This movie was made for like a ham sandwich for about $2 million, and it's made about 78 million worldwide. So that's why, a film like this, despite only making $78 million, is in some ways more of a success than something like even like Inside Out 2, which is like the biggest movie of the year, right? Looking here at some other films, just before we kind of wrap up, want to mention We Live in Time, right? That's another kind of indie film vying for some awards love. I think it went not wide last week, but it went wide a couple weeks ago. But it's been able to kind of consistently stay in the top 10. Did drop from 6th to 9th place. Only brought in a little over 2 million. But again, films like this are not super, their raison d'etre is not to make a shit ton of money. And then looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, this is such a strange movie. We have Red One, like an action comedy about Santa, played by J.K. Simmons, who gets kidnapped. So Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who's like the head elf, has to team up with Chris Evans' character. I think he's just like a dude to like find Santa, right? The trailers seem kind of like, it seems like it could be like a great comedy, if it really leaned into how stupid this is. But the movie the trailers kind of made me feel like it wants to be semi-cool, But this is just not a cool concept. So, you know, it's only projected to make around 24 to 30 million in that opening weekend. You know, which isn't anything to, you know, ignore, but you know, I don't know who's going to want to go to this movie, frankly. I'm trying not to be mean, but I don't know if this is even going to hit those projections. Wow, what an interesting story. I'm sure you have some thoughts about the topic, so comment below, let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really, really helps people find the channel and makes me feel all warm inside. Until next time, I'm Peter Mancuso. Peace out.